JavaScript functions. If you want to improve your coding and you're learning JavaScript, learning functions and their basic patterns and how to use them will seriously speed up your coding development. What we're looking at now is a JavaScript function declaration. The first thing you do when you make a function is you write one. So we can see this one here is written out. Function alert hello world to the user. You can see it starts and ends there on line 23, and inside the statement or the actual code that we will run when the function is called is just a basic alert. That's step one of making a function. Step two is you need to call the function. So it's always a two-step process. You write the function and then you call the function. What you're looking at here is a basic pattern of a function declaration, a nice decent custom name. It's kind of useful to name the functions relating to what they do, so it makes your code more readable. And then we call the function down here. Now this function is really simple. You can see it's just triggering an alert. On our next functions page, we've got a JavaScript pattern which is using two functions together. Now the first function is doing the same as it was before, an alert with hello world, but inside of that function, and this is the key part, we're calling the second function like that. Now outside of the function, this area here is what's known as global scope. It's to do with this idea of scope, which I suggest you read up on if you're wanting to improve in JavaScript functions. Now we called the second function over here, and you can see this is where the second function is written, and we can see it's doing a hello world. So what we can do with functions is we can make them work so things will happen one after the other. The code will come along and call the function, and then this function will come into play, this will run, and then this part of the code will then be triggered, and then this function will run. So you can see it's almost sequentially from top to bottom inside of the function, and then if after your activities or your coding steps have happened, you want something else to happen, you can then put it in another function and call it further down the code line. So that's a way of controlling code sequentially. JavaScript is what's known as an asynchronous language, so things happen in an event chain. Single-threaded is another term that's used. Things happening one after the other is how to think of JavaScript. But for humans, when we watch the programs, it seems to be happening at once or the same time because the computer is executing these things at light speed or very, very quickly, to say the least. So that's our second pattern, two functions together. Our third pattern is a little bit different. We've extended the two pattern function to now have three functions, but we've put it inside of a document ready. Now this is just a jQuery function, but what that does is it means that all of these functions are now kind of wrapped inside of a parent function, a mother function, like a mothership or something kind of all-encompassing. The document ready, which ends on line 62, it actually wraps or envelops these functions. And a lot of programs will always be wrapped inside of a large function. Sometimes the function won't be a document ready, it might be a named function, or it might be what's known as a IIFE, an immediately invoked function expression. But just get used to this idea of functions within functions. You'll see it a lot, and as long as you do what you can kind of see going on here, where the functions are laid out in a clean way, they're given names, we're using spacing and comments and also indentation, you'll be able to keep track of what your code is doing, and most importantly, with the comments, we'll know exactly what the code does. Step one, I wrote this function. Step two, I call this function. This alert then happens, and then it's going straight to step four, which seems a little bit unusual, but it's because the third step for me was writing this. But this will not happen until it's called. So we can see within the first function here, alert hello world to the user, it then calls second alert hello world to the user, which means this all of a sudden happens. This alert will fire, then that will follow the same pattern and call the third function, which starts on line 56 below. Third alert hello world to the user calls this function. So what we're seeing here is lots of function declarations and combinations, so we can start to kind of control when code happens. And this is a nice and easy pattern in order to see that. Let's look at how this code works in the browser. Hello world, second time, and then third time. So you can see this is definitely controlling the order that code is running. And this is what functions are very useful for, or certainly controlling functions. You can start to control when code is going to happen by wrapping code in a certain function and then calling that function in a certain place. That's when that code will actually happen. So when we first light the fuse for, say, if we were thinking of these functions as dynamite sticks, dynamite 1, 2, and 3, when we first light the fuse, we're actually doing that here. And you can see that this one is not sitting inside of any of these function declarations, but it's sitting inside this document ready. Now the other cool thing with function declarations is I could move this first function call to the top, or I could move this first function call to the bottom within the document ready function. And that's because you can call function declarations before or after the function is written in the code, and the function will work. That's unique to function declarations. Lastly, we've got another function pattern, this time just two functions. And this is a function which updates the first list item. It is then called here, and then function update second list item. Now, just to show you how important the two-step process of functions is, meaning you write the function, second list item, and you have to call it for it to work, what I'll do is I'll leave the function there, so we still have the function, but I've just commented out the actual calling or invoking of that function. Let's see what happens here. If I open this in the browser, you can see 1 is yellow because our code line, instead of being an alert, we're actually using some jQuery to do something, change the color to yellow. But number 2, which is the second list item, we can see that up here, that is not changing in color to blue because I've stopped the call. I've stopped the function call. Now, if I was to do that to the first function call, as you could imagine, nothing is going to happen. If I was to allow the second function call to work, meaning I uncomment it, here's our first function, here's our second function. But our second function call is inside. That's the important part. It's inside of the first function. So let's see if when we run this program, it actually calls update second list item. Nothing. And that's because for this code to work, we have to pull the trigger, we have to light the match for this first function, so the inside part of it will run, and then it will get to here. Now that wouldn't be the case if I was to remove this function call from the inside of the first function and just put it below the second function. If I now was to comment out the first function instruction, meaning I'll leave this here but we haven't called it, but I leave the second function call and now it's outside of these functions. It's on the same level as the document ready function. Okay? So it's kind of sitting on the same level as the two function declarations, the green ones you can see here. Let's see what happens. Reload. Now blue works. Okay, so we're calling this and this one works. Okay, and now of course if I uncomment the first function call and reload, the first one's going to work as well. So it's all about the chain of calling the functions as to what's going to work and what's not. And a lot of people who start working with functions naturally forget this second step. You've got to call a function for it to work. And if you leave a function call, like if I grab update first list item and I put it inside of update second list item, but then I don't call second list item, if you put it inside of a function, okay, the computer's going to come and have a look at this code, and it's going to look for a function call. But it can't run this call because it's sitting inside. It needs to run on this level first before it can look inside of a function, meaning I have to call update second list item for the computer to then run this code. And because I've commented that out here, if I save reload, nothing happens. But if I call second list item, now it will run this code, blue, and then it will call the first list item, which will do yellow. There we go.